Welcome to the B Block Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Scott. I appreciate you for joining me. And you know what we're here for. Happened on Friday. Might call it a Friday news dump, even though I don't think that you would actually consider this a Friday news dump if you fully expected this news to come. And what news am I talking about? It is the Texans firing offensive coordinator Bobby Slowik after 2 seasons. The second season in which became one where they took a massive step back. I don't think that there's any way around that. There's no way to kind of dress that up or sugarcoat it. The Texans took a massive step back offensively in year 2 with Bobby Slowik as the offensive coordinator. And they oftentimes looked like an offense that was poorly coached, specifically the offensive line, and then also the play calling. And I think those are the 2 things that ultimately did Bobby Slowik in. It is amazing to me, and I'll say this up front, before we even talk about how this move is justified and what went wrong with Bobby Slowik, it is a fascinating case where you go from Slowik being the dude that was interviewing for head coaching jobs. He was sort of the talk of the town. And just sort of that, it seemed like he was that next man up. For sure, he was going to be a dude that would be up for head coaching jobs in the next head coaching cycle. You saw very little of that this time around. I mean, I saw that the Jets apparently interviewed him virtually, and they ultimately end up going with Aaron Glenn. And shout out to Houston's own, Alden Nimitz's own Aaron Glenn for getting that job with the Jets. But Bobby Slowik kind of fell off the map with this performance that the Texans offense put up out there this past season. And so it really shouldn't surprise you from a performance standpoint, but just when you think about how it could just swing. Like I remember last year when they were asking DeMeco Ryans about what kind of advice would you give to Bobby Slowik as he interviews for all of these different jobs. And he interviewed for, I forget the number, but he interviewed for several head coaching jobs last cycle, just after 1 year calling plays for the Texans because of the season that they had. And DeMeco Ryans' advice verbatim, I was right there. He said, be selective with the jobs that you take. And they end up giving him a pay raise, bringing him back. And it was felt like this coronation going into the season, going into off-season camp, that, man, we got to bring this dude back and everything's going to be good because we got this continuity in year 2 and we're all going to develop, together and all this other kind of stuff. And man, how that changed quick. Like, think about it, man. They gave dude a pay raise based off of 1 season of work, because he seemed like he was somebody that was going to be in demand. DeMeco Ryans up there talking about be selective about what job you take. It is a bit of a cautionary tale. It tells you, hey, man, sometimes you might want to take the job whether you ready or not. Maybe you might not want to be so selective. And I don't know if Bobby Slowik was actually offered a head coaching job last year. But if he was, and if you are, man, it shows, man, you got to capitalize on when you hot right there when you hot. Whether you feel like you're ready or not, damn it, you better get ready, because this might be your opportunity. This might be your chance. Bobby Slowik interviewing for all of those head coaching. Now, he's still a young man, but interviewing for all those head coaching jobs, and then the next year he's fired. I'm not saying he's not going to get another job and he's not going to be able to kind of rectify the career or resurrect the career in a sense, but this is a massive step back from where he thought he was, from the trajectory that he thought he was on. So to me, that part of it immediately made me think, man, I wonder what that must be like, to go from this type of high to this type of low. But man, this offense, like the tape, the numbers, the eye test, whatever it is that you feel like you rely on, this offense doesn't pass any of it. Doesn't pass any sort of measure of test for justifying keeping Bobby Slowik after what you saw. And so, yeah, this is a move. I think the part that was that made it less surprising, I think, was the way that DeMeco Ryans talked earlier in the week, right? Like, to me, that's the reason why this was one that you could see coming, because when Ryans was asked about Bobby Slowik, he did not go into any kind of depth on his performance or like what their future looked like. And I know a lot of people think that, media makes way too much of what's said in press conferences and we do too much dissecting of what people say in interviews. But a lot of times the most revealing thing is what people don't say in interviews and what they don't say at press conferences. And those things, what's not said a lot of times speaks a lot louder, much louder than what is. And what you didn't hear D'Amico Ryans say, like his quote was, I saw some growth throughout the year, something to that effect. But what you didn't say was, or what you didn't hear him say was, we look forward to working together next year. I look forward to working with Bobby again next season and getting this thing right. I look forward to getting with him in the offseason and us figuring out what went wrong and trying to, right the ship and figure out how we're going to get this thing going, how we're going to keep getting, you didn't hear none of that. How we going to rally. You didn't hear none of that. And then it wasn't framed in a question and it wasn't brought up unsolicited in the answer, because I think there was a feeling of, hey, this is something that might need to happen. This is something that, based on what we've seen, might need to happen. And my evaluation of Slowik has been pretty consistent throughout the season. And it was showing itself, I think, early on in the season where Slowik seems to do a decent enough job with coming up with a script or a game plan or an idea for how he wants to attack a defense. But where he failed or where he came up short oftentimes was when it was time to make the adjustment, when it was time to deviate from the plan and come up with a new plan and do something different. And he either did not have the answers he either too often did not have the answers or too often came up with the wrong answers. And that's a big part of the job, right? Like I was saying this, making this point, he didn't seem to so much be the problem as much as he was not really part of the solution and didn't seem to be as much of a problem solver, as much of a solution finder. And a big part of that job, a big part of that role is to solve the problem, is to solve the riddle, is to find the solution. And if you can't do that, or if you don't do that well enough, if you don't do that at, say, a championship level, then there's only so far you can go with a guy like that. And I feel like that over time, over the course of this season, that's what Slowik ultimately revealed himself to be, as someone who had decent enough ideas to maybe get the job or to simply do the job, to just perform the basic job functions, but didn't necessarily come up with the part that makes you really, really good at the job, which is coming up with the answers and solving the problems and solving the issues. And then just simply the fact that they looked like, and I just made this point, but they looked like a poorly coached offense throughout the year, specifically the offensive line. We talked about this a lot on the podcast, on the radio, and pretty much anywhere you hear people talk about the Texans. How it is that they were that bad in pass protection, given how much they've invested in that offensive line, is criminal. Like the fact that they couldn't handle stunts and blitzes, and it was a theme throughout the year, that speaks to coaching. I know a lot of people think, we kind of just reduce being an offensive coordinator to just simply calling the plays, and then we'll evaluate an offensive coordinator just based off of the scheme and the play calling. But there's more to being an offensive coordinator than just that. Like, you're an actual coach. You're supposed to be coaching the execution part of the offense. Like, you don't just come up with the schemes, the ideas, and call the plays. You coach the execution part and the details of said offense as the offensive coordinator, along with your position coaches, but you all do that together. And of course, I mentioned Bobby Slowik. We're talking about him being fired by the Texans on Friday. They also fired the offensive line coach, Chris Strausser, and the assistant offensive line coach, Cole Popovich. So that speaks to what the issues were with the offensive line. And I think that was the move that we were all expecting. And the big question mark was, will Bobby Slowik be fired? Again, I think that question was pretty much answered with what DeMeco Ryans did not say on Monday, which was, man, this dude did a hell of a job, and I can't wait to work with him again next year. Like, we didn't get anything close to that. So, yeah, man, the part about not coaching the details well enough, or your unit, right, your offensive unit not looking like a well-coached unit, falls at your feet. So, like, I didn't think that he was as bad of a play caller as you would hear from week to week. Like, there was always a play or two where you can nitpick and say, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. But you can do that with any play caller. You can do that with pretty much any play caller, even the really good ones. I thought he called plays or scripted games well enough, but it always seemed like the adjustments were just lacking and not there. And that's how you get, I mean, how do you get an offense that, or, a team that gets the Detroit Lions on the ropes the way they did and fails to score a single point in the second half? The fact that they were only able to put up 12 against Kansas City and gave up the 8 sacks, and the pass protection just being a constant theme, a constant issue with this team, it's got to fall at the coach's feet. So, absolutely understood how we arrived at this place. It is wild to me how you go from here to there so very quickly. They gave him a raise. And wanted him to stick around and gave him a raise to stick around because of how much he was in demand, how high of a demand he was in. So it's a wild place to be in. We'll think about replacements, and this already something that's being talked about. It's like, who is the next guy? And I don't expect this to be something that they come up with like soon. Like, I feel like we got at least another week or so. I'd be surprised if by this time next week I guess maybe next weekend they could have somebody, but and they probably already have a good idea, but this is something that you don't really have to rush. Like, I don't feel like you have to rush and have this done by the Super Bowl per se. Like, it's something that they can figure out and figure out who's out there. But the replacements that have been thrown out, I've heard Chip Kelly, I've heard Clint Kubiak, I've heard people talk about Josh McCown. And there are some connections that you can make with, and some ideas, some reasons why you could think of any of those guys being brought here. So, because they all have some type of tie to DeMeco Ryans or to and a reason to be up for this job. So, those are some names that I would say immediately I would think of. Gerard Johnson, I know, is the big internal candidate that a lot of people will talk about and wonder about. Of course, it is noteworthy that the rest of the offensive staff was left in place, and whoever they do hire as the offensive coordinator is going to be the one to decide the futures of the rest of the staff. So whether Gerard Johnson even stays around is going to be, depending on who they bring in as the offensive coordinator. The idea that he could be the next man up, I think this is what's tough about it, talking about going from here to there, and I want to say they might have even given Gerard a raise to stick around because he was also in high demand and still somebody that's highly regarded. But like this time last year, when they give Slowik the raise and they're going into year 2, a lot of people are thinking, okay, maybe Gerard could be the one that be a part of the succession plan, be the one that replaces Slowik whenever Slowik gets a head coaching job. And I think a lot of people felt comfortable with that idea. But when it goes south, when it goes the other direction, and you end up having to get rid of the offensive coordinator and he doesn't go on and get a head coaching job, and now you're in a position where you're having to fix the situation as opposed to just giving passing the baton to the next man up, it feels a little bit different. So I would have liked Gerard Johnson as the offensive coordinator more had it been more part of a succession plan of Bobby Slowik doing a good job and moving on because he did a good job, as opposed to now you're asking somebody to come in here and fix it. And a lot of the issue is, a lot of the reason why you are here is because the guy that you had in place, the guy that you thought was supposed to be the guy, wasn't as good of a fixer as you needed him to be. So now you're asking somebody to come in here as a fixer. If it works better with the first time play caller, then you feel a lot better about the second first time play caller following him in that job. But since it didn't, and now you're asking somebody to come in and kind of clean the mess or right the ship, it seems like you want somebody that's done that before, that's actually called plays. Mike McCarthy's name is another one that I've heard people throw out there, who I actually would not mind. Let me say that, as somebody that doesn't necessarily love Mike McCarthy as a head coach, I think he's a pretty good play caller, pretty good offensive coordinator, and would not mind having Mike McCarthy in the building, having Mike McCarthy work with CJ Stroud. I would not hate that at all. I really wouldn't. But Chip Kelly's got to be top of the list. I think Clint Kubiak is an interesting thought because of the obvious Kubiak ties. And the Josh McCown thing, I'll say, I wouldn't mind Josh McCown, but I don't get the fascination. I don't quite get the fashion. I like Josh McCown. I like him quite a bit. Sam Houston State guy. But I don't get the fascination quite. And maybe that would be part of the experience if he were to be somebody to come around. If he were to be somebody that they were to hire. But I gotta figure Chip Kelly's higher on that list. I gotta figure that Mike McCarthy would be higher on that list, quite honestly. And Clint Kubiak makes a lot more sense. So we'll see. And maybe it is somebody internal. Maybe it is somebody that we just don't know of and don't know that they think that much of. We do know that they experimented with other guys calling plays in the preseason. Like it wasn't just Bobby Slowik calling the plays. Other guys on the offensive staff called plays during the preseason. Maybe they saw something out of that person, but or some of those people. But again, I would go back to it being really important that the Texans find somebody that is experienced, has a track record with finding answers and finding solutions. Somebody that they know they can rely on to do that. And also, I mean, you're thinking about it now, CJ Stroud going into year 3. I talked about how precious the early years are, even with the non-quarterbacks, before you have to start paying them. You're now going into year 3 of the rookie contract with CJ Stroud. That time where you got the quarterback cheap is dwindling. And not just that from a financial standpoint, but from a development standpoint. Like CJ Stroud, I think, is still one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, but because of, and I think this is the working theory, because they couldn't find the answers last year in year 2, there was a regression. There was a step back as opposed to the step forward, there wasn't that progression that I think people were hoping for and expecting. So year 3 is a pivotal year in figuring out where you're going to go in that fork in the road, So it's not like you want somebody that's going to come in here and be here for a year, right? Like, do you feel like you can find somebody that can be here for 2 to 3 years, that can be here through the length of, at the very least, through the length of CJ Stroud's rookie contract, and hopefully somebody that could be here even longer than that? That's the tough part about having offensive coordinators with a defensive head coach. Because if he's really good, he's probably going to get hired as a head coach at some point. Or it goes in the other direction and he's not a fixer. He's not a problem solver. So this is an exciting time. Makes the off season a lot more, I think, interesting, because you're coming off a successful season for the most part, because it was basically the same season as before that you were all excited about, that everybody was excited about. Won a division, won a playoff game at home, You feel like even with the regression that you had offensively, you still feel like you got that foundation with your coach, your quarterback, these foundational pieces on defense, Derek Stingley, Will Anderson Jr., all of these different Kamari Lassiter, Kalen Bullock, all of these different guys over there got some decisions, of course, to make on the defensive line. But another year, Daniil Hunter, like you feel good about what you got defensively. You feel good about your quarterback for the most part. You just got to figure out this offensive coordinator thing. And so the whole offseason really becomes about who they pick as the offensive coordinator. Then what does the offense look like? What's that offensive coordinator's philosophy? Is that somebody that's going to come in and still do some of the Shanahan, Kubiak type of stuff? Or is that going to be somebody that just totally remakes the entire offense and the entire scheme and is CJ Stroud learning a whole new offense in year 3? And then how are they building the team around that? We talked about them already needing a weapon, but what does weaponry look like under the new offense for the Texans? Those are things to be really excited about following throughout the offseason. So we're going to do that. There's a lot more to talk about with the Texans aside from this, but I did want to get some thoughts on this out there. I know everybody has, but of course, when this type of stuff happens, I'm working for the man and can't get my own individual project out there as quickly as everybody else can. But I did want to talk about this because I mean, obviously it changes the offseason. I know, again, I said we were expecting it earlier in the week because of how DeMeco Ryans did not talk about Bobby Slowik as opposed to how he did. But now that it's happened, it changes the entire complexion of the Texans offseason. What does the offense look like next year going forward? And who are you entrusting with CJ Stroud's future, with his development, with this fork in the road, if you will, in the career? So this will be fun, man. This will be a fun offseason to break it all down. I'm going to be back really to talk more about what's going on with these Texans, but not just that. We got Astros news. Alex Bregman possibly coming back. Jose Altuve to the outfield. Say it ain't so. I don't know what the hell is going on over there. What's going on over there downtown and what they're thinking about. But I think they're going to be really fun to cover too, because they are also at a bit of a fork in the road. We'll talk about all of that next on the B Block podcast. But for now, I appreciate y'all for being with me. Make sure that you subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. And until next time.